Hello, and welcome to Play This, a Talk This podcast production. This month, in our investigation of gameplay as storytelling, we'll be talking about ludonarrative dissonance. Well, sort of. Anyone who's familiar with the Uncharted series or other games like it has experienced ludonarrative dissonance. That's just a fancy way of saying that the gameplay and the story don't exactly line up. Nathan Drake is a likable guy, always ready with a quip and a dashing smile, goes on rollicking adventures, he gets the girl, and he also murders thousands of people and shows no sign of ever being bothered by this. When you add the gameplay to the character, he comes off a little evil, honestly, which he's not supposed to. However, pretty much everything that could be said about ludonarrative dissonance has already been said. It's not an ideal way to make a game. It doesn't stop a game from being good all the time, but it can be an obstacle to enjoyment. Trust me, I'm experiencing it in spades with Octopath Traveler right now. Why is Therian helping these people with no gain? I've decided it's because 1, he can't read maps, and 2, nobody understands sarcasm and or are willfully ignorant to it. Yes, I totally want to help you. Really? Shucks, that's nice. Let's go kill a snake!
I've made a huge mistake.
I want to talk about when a gameplay story segment and a main story segment seem to possess different tones or even to belong to different genres. What I mean by gameplay segment is side quests, exploration, combat, etc. What I mean by main story segment is, well, the main story. Anything that directly furthers the central plot, usually coming in the form of cutscenes. Uncharted doesn't really experience this tonal shift despite the disparity of Nathan Drake. In both sides of the story, the tone is relatively consistent. It's got suspense, mystery, and touches of comedy and drama. No matter whether you're watching Nathan talk to someone or making Nate shoot people, it falls comfortably into action-adventure territory. When you're actually playing the game, this consistency makes it easier to ignore the aforementioned dissonance. Everything fits in the moment, even though you can take a step back afterwards and see the disconnect. It's easier to keep the flow nice and logical when a game is linear like Uncharted, because the creator has more control over player experience. Refer to my previous video for some related thoughts on that. However, open world and semi-open world games often have more trouble keeping that flow, since players can decide at their own volition whether to go into main story or explore the side content. An easy way to deal with it is to try to keep the tone of the main story and the gameplay story similar. Nier Automata, for instance, does this pretty well with side quests following a similar arc, featuring weirdness and death, to the main story. Alternatively, other games try to keep side quests and main quests blended together and hard to distinguish. Breath of the Wild, for instance, takes that approach. However, in some cases, gameplay story and the main story possess wildly different tones. Unlike ludonarrative dissonance, which I believe will always hurt a game in retrospect, this isn't always a bad thing. For this video, we'll be honing in specifically on the Yakuza series and Final Fantasy XV to explore when tone switching works and doesn't work in games. Let's talk Yakuza first. Yakuza 0 is a prequel to the Yakuza series and one that finally caught on with a wider audience in the West. I think it's probably the most played of the games right now, and it's the perfect storm of the incongruousness that defines the games. The story follows 2 protagonists. A young Yakuza Kazuma Kiryu is attempting to clear his name of murder, while former Yakuza Goro Majima is trying to murder somebody in order to get his place back within the organization. During the game, we also follow Kiryu as he hires a chicken to work at his real estate firm and engages in a dance battle with totally not Michael Jackson, while Majima plays dress-up with the girls at the cabaret club and fights with an old lady over street food. It's a weird game. On paper, this game is a mess. It feels like 2 completely different games. And yet it totally works. It all comes down to compatibility of tones, consistency of characters, and honestly, consistency of quality. As for the first, the melodrama and mellow ridiculousness, I know that's not a word, but roll with me, work because they both have that over-the-top aspect. Nothing in Yakuza is done in half measure. The drama is over the top, the absurdity is over the top, the violence is certainly over the top. And Yakuza 0 has the added benefit of being set against the Japanese bubble economy of the 80s, where it seemed like everything was in excess. Everything reaches so far in its own direction that it ends up wrapping around to converge again. Kiryu and Majima are also characters uniquely suited to dealing with these changes in tone. Kiryu is direct and unendingly sincere in everything he does. It makes him both an easy protagonist to get behind while also positioning him as the straight man in any scenario. Majima, meanwhile, is already a character with multiple faces that he puts on as he needs them. He's a character that can work almost anywhere, whether he's engaging in excessive violence or excessive stalking of Kiryu-chan. That part's from Yakuza Kiwami, but the point stands across games. Both parts of Yakuza are also just good. Final Fantasy XV is a different case. The game's main story follows Noctis on a journey to protect his kingdom from the invasion of a foreign country through any means necessary. From there, it explodes into a whole fate of the world type fantasy. It's dramatic, high stakes, fighting gods type stuff. Kingdoms fall, people die, big drama. However, the gameplay side quest story is really just about 4 dudes exploring the world and being friends. It's just kinda chill, peaceful, heartwarming, a little emotional at points, but in interpersonal ways, and it conflicts with the main game like nobody's business. So, using the same criteria that makes Yakuza work somehow, we can see the way that Final Fantasy XV fails. First off, these tones aren't super compatible. They belong to 2 different genres of story, and unlike Yakuza, they don't find any ways to overlap with each other. I don't think it's impossible to mesh some high fantasy with slice of life, but it's harder to create the right flow within an open world structure where you have little control over the player's actions at any given time. They may overload on the slice of life aspects or get too far deep into the high fantasy aspects, and then when they return to the other point, it feels odd. While Yakuza's tones are linked by their overblown nature, Final Fantasy has 1 overblown and 1 mellow, with the mellow overtaking the majority of the game time. That means that the overblown cutscenes, as I said, feel entirely out of place in the experience once you get to them. Then we have consistency of characters. Perhaps even suitability of characters is the better term here. Gladio, Noctis, Prompto, and Ignis are a great cast for a nice slice of life featuring cute boys. They're not quite as great in the dramatic parts. That's not to say that they don't work at all. Prompto gets his due in episode Prompto, and the dungeon after Ignis loses his eyesight is actually one of my favorite parts of the game. I'm also one of those weird people who likes most of the infamous Chapter 13. However, all 3 of those points deal more with the relationships between the 4 characters than they do with the plot of the game. The main story is just so preoccupied in its grander designs of crystals and immortal beings and gods that the good interpersonal stuff sometimes gets lost in the loop. Within the greater narrative, their smaller personalities and conflicts get swallowed because they don't find ways to relate the two to each other. And finally, yeah, the main plot of Final Fantasy XV is a bit of a mess. I admit, I'm not an impartial judge, and my experience with the main story versus my experience with the gameplay story might be coloring my opinion. But I think we can all generally agree that cruising around the map in the Regalia is at the heart of the game and the more enjoyable part. The story within the gameplay could have been used to draw out a totally different yet far more suitable main story. Honestly, despite not having much interest in this style of game myself, I think the Breath of the Wild open world structure could have been a dream for Final Fantasy XV. Tone down the main plot a bit into a few plot lines focusing on Noctis' friends, throw in a few more side quests, make the final boss some sort of rite of passage for Noctis inheriting the throne, make it a game entirely about trying every flavor of cup noodles. I'm just spitballing here. Look forward to the adventures of Noodletis coming soon. So in the end, this connects pretty well to the previous Play This installment. It can be incredibly hard to get across what you want to get across when you sacrifice control of the story to the player. It's a problem lots of games are reckoning with as open worlds become more prevalent. As more players demand some kind of open world, story writers and game designers are losing the advantage of control over an experience that other mediums enjoy. The only thing that you have complete control over is the tone of each part of your story. It's always going to be less risky and more consistent to go with the safe approach of keeping things tonally consistent. After all, you don't want to end up with a Final Fantasy 15, as much as I did enjoy that game. But it's possible to go for something different. You've just got to find that common thread and hang on to it. And if you do, you might just end up with a Yakuza. And believe me, the video game sphere could do more with some chickens working in real estate. If you liked this video, why don't you hit the like button, share it to your friends, and subscribe for more content coming soon. Still coming are videos about perspective swapping, AI sidekicks, menus, and more. If you have a suggestion for a topic to cover, leave it in the comments. If you can't wait for the next video, check out our main podcast, Talk This, where we talk about different games every week, available for download on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more. We even have a Yakuza episode, so if you want more thoughts on those games, make sure to check that out. We also have an episode on Final Fantasy 15, so that's another option for you. Follow us on social media for updates and other fun content. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Talk This Podcast. Just check the description for all the links you need. So, until next time, I wish you happy playing.
That's it!
What's up, Iggy?
I've come up with a new recipe.